Hello, my name is Sensei Alex Kakuyo, and I'm a teacher in the Bright Dawn Center of Oneness Buddhism. I'm also the author of the Buddhist blog, The Same Old Zen. The title of today's talk is 3 Ways to Deal with Suffering. Now, the first noble truth of Buddhism states, life is suffering. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that every moment of our life is a torture fest or that we should be afraid, but it does mean that throughout our day, as we live our lives, things will go wrong. It might be as simple as a child forgetting to take out the trash, or it could be as serious as the loss of a job or the death of a loved one. Things go wrong is a simple but unavoidable truth of life. So as Buddhists, it's important that we find ways to deal with our suffering in ways that make life simple and more calm for both ourselves and others. And that'll be what we'll talk about today. So the first way to deal with suffering is renunciation. We find something that causes us harm or causes harm to others, and we cut it out of our lives, thus removing the suffering from our lives and making things better for everyone. One example of renunciation from my own life is that I no longer drink alcohol. Now, I drank quite a bit when I was in college in the Marine Corps, but when I started practicing Buddhism, I stopped. Not because my teacher wagged his finger at me and told me this was something I had to do, but simply because when I looked at the karma of my actions and the suffering I was experiencing, hangovers, not having money in my bank account, I realized a lot of it could be tracked to my drinking. So I stopped drinking and my life improved. Renunciation. Now, does this mean that everyone should stop drinking? Of course not. We're all adults and we can make decisions for ourselves, but it does mean that it's an important part of our practice to investigate our lives and see if there are things that we're doing that it's better off if we stop doing, whether it's drinking or something else. Now, the second way to deal with suffering is reduction. So we use this tactic when we identify something that causes us suffering, but it's not something that we're really willing or able to get rid of. A good example of this would be clothing. So I wear clothes, so do you, I'm sure, but the fact is there's a lot of suffering involved in the making and transportation of clothing, be it sweatshops, be it the carbon footprint of trucks as they bring clothing to the market. But this isn't something we can really stop doing. We can't walk around naked, right? But one way we can attack the suffering caused by our clothing purchases is simply to reduce the amount of clothing we buy. So we go into the store and maybe we only buy 2 outfits instead of 3. Or maybe we see if that coat we have can last one more winter season before we get a new one. Again, we're not cutting these items out of our lives completely. We're just working with them a little bit less so that we can also deal with the suffering they cause a little bit less as well. And this is something we can do with multiple facets of our lives as well. So that's reduction. And the third and final way to deal with suffering is acceptance. And this is something we do with sources of suffering that we simply can't escape and we can't reduce. So, for example, Buddhism teaches that we are all of a nature that we will be born, that we will get old, that we will get sick, that we will die, that we will lose things we want and gain things we don't want, that we will lose friends and meet enemies. What I just listed were the 8 winds of suffering, as Buddha in his wisdom described them. And these are some things that we can't really reduce and we can't avoid altogether. It's just a part of our lives. So we have to practice acceptance. We accept that we're of a nature that we'll be born, that we'll get sick, that we'll get old and we'll die. And we don't try to avoid these things, but we don't run towards them either. We just accept that they're a part of our lives and we continue with our day in the same way that we might accept that it's raining outside. It's not what we want, but it is what it is, and we're not going to let it ruin our day. So to review, suffering is an inescapable part of our lives, but there are techniques we can use to cope with that suffering more effectively. We can renounce the sources of our suffering. We can reduce the sources of our suffering, or we can accept the sources of our suffering if they're completely unescapable. So that's the talk for today. I hope it was helpful. If you'd like to read articles I've written about Buddhist practice, you can do that at my blog, The Same Old Zen, which is at sameoldzen.blogspot.com. You can also email me if you have follow-up questions at sameoldzen@gmail.com. If you're watching this on Facebook or Twitter, please don't forget to share or retweet this video. That way we can all continue to learn together. If you're watching on YouTube, please don't forget to either subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you'll be notified when I post talks in the future. So, until next time, Amitabha.